Good evening, everyone. We have now, in our past discussion, shown that the Bible's chronology of the past is true. And now we will begin our discussion on the chronology related to Bible prophecies. And the most logical place to start is with Nebuchadnezzar's image, which I know we're all very familiar with. In the second chapter of Daniel, God gives Nebuchadnezzar, and really all of us, the blueprint for the balance of the time remaining in his 6,000-year plan for mankind. Now, to set the stage chronologically, Daniel's image comes from Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which he had in the second year of his reign. We read there in Daniel 2:1, "And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him." So this dream, it says, occurs in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And we can pretty reliably set this date at between 604 and 603 BC. And let's consider some of the conflicting data and how it all works out. What is a bit confusing is how we count years at this time. Israel changes years on the first day of the seventh month. Babylon changes years on the first day of spring. And we change years in our Gregorian calendar on the first day of January. So matching specific dates within a year can be challenging. For the most part, in these talks, I will always use the Gregorian dates, but that can make the Bible dates appear to be 1 year off when they're really not. Now, Daniel tells us in his first year, Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem. In Daniel 1:1 we read, "In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it." Well, what does the world archaeology tell us about this date? What led up to this advance by Babylon into Canaan? Well, what it was Babylon's victory over Egypt at Carchemish. That's a city there in northern Syria. And this happened in 605 BC, one of the most significant battles in history. This battle took place in late spring or early summer of that year. In this battle, Babylon was victorious. And immediately following that battle, Nebuchadnezzar, the crown prince at the time of Babylon, led the Babylonians as he chased Egypt south, putting the cities of Syria and Israel under siege. And this is the siege that Daniel is referring to when he says the attack came in Jehoiakim's third year. These events are well recorded in the Babylonian chronologies, but also recorded at this time in August of that same year. That's just a month or so after the Battle of Carchemish. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, died, and that would be Nebuchadnezzar's father. And so Nebuchadnezzar returns to Babylon to officially take the throne. And while it's not reflected in the Babylonian chronicles, it is clear from the Bible, which says that Israel fell to Jehoiakim in the fourth year, as well as modern archaeology, which shows that Babylon returned in the winter and conquered Jerusalem, that this all happened after the warning Jeremiah gave Israel to Jehoiakim in his fourth year. Remember, Daniel said he came in the third year. Now Jehoiakim says it's in the, or not, Jeremiah is saying it's in the fourth. So in Jeremiah 25:1 we read, "The word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the fourth year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, that was the first year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon." So this is what Jeremiah said would happen, and what in fact did happen. From Jeremiah 25:9, "Behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, saith the Lord, and Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land, and against the inhabitants thereof, and against all these nations round about, and will utterly destroy them, and make them an astonishment, and a hissing, and a perpetual desolation." Putting the Jerusalem city under siege before August 605 and withdrawing to be crowned king, and then returning to conquer the city a few months later in the winter of 604, as modern archaeology suggests, explains the siege in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim and the prophecy of Jeremiah concerning the 4th year of Jehoiakim, who prophesied that God was going to bring Babylon against Israel. Jerusalem was put under siege. The siege was pulled back when Nebuchadnezzar died. And then Babylon came again and conquered Jerusalem in 604 in the 4th year of Jehoiakim. So there's no inconsistency in the historical record concerning Nebuchadnezzar's advance against Jerusalem. Now, the year 604 starts 2 significant prophecies. It starts the punishment God promised Israel in the Mosaic Law, and it starts the prophecy of Jeremiah that Daniel was considering towards the end of his life, that the children of Israel would be captive in Babylon for 70 years. Now, there are 2 prophecies of 70 years relevant to Babylon, and these are often confused to be the same prophecy. They are not. One has to do with the nations, Israel and the king of Babylon, and the other has to do with Israel's time in Babylon. That would be the one Daniel was focusing on. But to see this correctly, we need to consider the history of Babylon as it pertains to Israel. Daniel was given these images in his 7th chapter, and it started out with a winged lion whose wings were eventually plucked. The winged lion was Assyria, a cruel and brutal empire which Babylon succeeded. This was the first stage, actually, of the Babylonian Empire, when the wings are plucked and the Babylonians take control of the empire. But we will start this evening with the Assyrians. We know from the scriptures that in 723 BC, Assyria came and took Israel in a siege that lasted about 3 years. We know that it lasted 3 years because it started in the 7th year of Hoshea and it ended in the 9th year of Hoshea, Hoshea being the final king of Israel. During this time, Assyria underwent a revolt, and while Shalmaneser began the war in 723 BC, it was Sargon in 721 who finished it. This revolt caused discord in Assyria, and so Babylon, which previously was under Assyrian control, revolted under a man named Merodach-Baladan and took advantage of that discord, and he rebelled at that time against Nineveh, obtaining their freedom, the freedom for the city of Babylon, from Assyria. History records it this way. During the unrest surrounding the accession of Sargon II of Assyria in 722 AD, Merodach-Baladan entered Babylon and claimed the Babylonian throne, which had belonged to his forebearer, Areba-Marduk. An attack by the Elamites 2 years later so weakened the Assyrians, though both sides claimed victory, that as the king of Babylonia, Merodach-Baladan remained unmolested by Syria for the next 10 years. It actually, if you count it the way we would count, it'd be the next 12 years from 722 to 710. Now, the kingdom of Judah's first contact with Babylon comes in the days of Hezekiah. In his 14th year, which would be 714 BC, Assyria puts Jerusalem under siege. Hezekiah pays tribute to Sennacherib, as we shall see, and that stops Assyria's siege at that time. We read of that here in 2 Kings 18. Now, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah and took them. And Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria to Lachish, saying, I have offended. Return from me. That which thou hast put it on me will I bear. And the king of Assyria appointed unto Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. And Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasure of the king's house. At that time did Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the pillars which Hezekiah, king of Judah, had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. So Hezekiah gives the king of Assyria all they demand, and the siege ends. Soon after this, the following year, 713, Hezekiah falls sick. He is granted 15 more years of life, which is how we place his cure at 713, since the last year of his reign was 698. 698 BC plus 15 years would be 713, the year that he was healed of his sickness. Then, soon after his illness, Merodach-Baladan, identified in the scriptures as Berodach-Baladan, king of Babylon, comes to visit him. There would have been a natural, that is, a sympathetic affinity between the two, as both were threatened militarily by Assyria at that time. This, by the way, is based upon the Babylonian Chronicles, and it agrees perfectly with the Bible. Merodach-Baladan visits Hezekiah in 713, being the king of Babylon since 722. And it couldn't be 701, as modern chronology suggests, because he falls to Sargon of Assyria in 710. That is, Merodach-Baladan is defeated by 710, so he's no longer around by 701. So the siege references has to be the one in 714 BC, in the 14th year of Hezekiah. Some point out that Merodach-Baladan does revolt again and takes Babylon in 703, but Sennacherib puts him down in but a few months, and it still wouldn't fit the narrative that Merodach-Baladan came to him after the siege, he having been completely disposed of before Sennacherib's second siege of Jerusalem, which would have been in 701. As we said before, there would have been a natural and a sympathetic affinity between the two, as both were contending militarily with Assyria at the time. And this is why God brought this prophecy against Hezekiah. In 2 Kings 20 we read, "And he said, What have they seen in thine house?" That's Isaiah asking. And Hezekiah answered, "All the things that are in mine house have they seen. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not showed them." And Isaiah said unto Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house and that which thy fathers have laid up in store unto this day shall be carried into Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." Now, whether or not Judah is sentenced to destruction from Babylon because of their planned cooperation with Babylon against Assyria, we really can't say. But what we can say is that this visit by the king of Babylon to Jerusalem solidifies the Bible's dates that there was a siege in the 14th year of Hezekiah, and that after that siege, the king of Babylon visited him. So what that means, and what the text proves, is that there were two sieges of Jerusalem. The first one in the 14th of Hezekiah, where Hezekiah pays tribute to the crown prince Sennacherib, taking even the gold from the temple. And the second siege, 13 years later, during the third campaign of Sennacherib, after he began his sole rule. The battle for Jerusalem, where Assyria falls and is destroyed overnight by God, is dated by the chronologists as 701 BC, the third year of Sennacherib's reign, which is still within the Bible's range of Hezekiah's reign. Hezekiah reigned from 727 to 698, a reign of 29 years. But what is known as this? Sennacherib was made crown prince in Assyria in 717 BC, and this is consistent with the Assyrian eponyms. Sennacherib, as the crown prince, Sargon being the king, brings an army against Jerusalem in 614. Hezekiah agrees to pay the tribute, and Sennacherib moves on to the next city. Now the next verse suggests that immediately after receiving this great tribute from Hezekiah, Sennacherib marches against Jerusalem. In 2 Kings 18, verse 17, we read, "And the king of Assyria sent Tartan and Rabsaris and Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a great host against Jerusalem. And they went up and came to Jerusalem, and when they were come up, they came and stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is in the highway of the fuller's field." Now, does this make any sense? Sennacherib had just achieved his goal. Hezekiah gave him all that he could, that Sennacherib had asked for, all the silver and gold in the king's house, and all that Hezekiah could provide. As we saw, he even cut off the gold from the temple to satisfy Sennacherib. What was Sennacherib to obtain by taking the battle further, except for a great loss of life when an army attacks a walled city? Now notice further, Sennacherib is said to be motivated to conclude the siege of Jerusalem because of an advancing of the king of Ethiopia, Tirhakah, who later becomes the third pharaoh of Egypt's 25th dynasty. We read in 2 Kings 19, "And when he heard say of Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, behold, he is come out to fight against thee, he sent messages to Hezekiah again, saying, Thus shall ye speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, Let not thy God in whom thou trustest deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria." Now, according to David Rohl in the New Chronology, the 25th dynasty doesn't solidify its power in Egypt till 705 BC under a pharaoh named Shirhakah, who was Tirhakah's cousin. So Tirhakah could not be advancing into Canaan during the Assyrian siege of 714, as Ethiopia had not yet completely been victorious in Egypt and hadn't yet established the rule of what they call the Black Pharaohs. But if the great battle where God is victorious for Hezekiah over Assyria is in 701 BC, then the Black Pharaohs are in fact in control of Egypt, and a young king of the Ethiopians, Tirhakah, who is destined to become a powerful pharaoh in Egypt, is quite logically making inroads into Canaan shortly after they had secured their power in Egypt and worrying Sennacherib. So we have two world historical notes which contradict each other if we assume the destruction of the Assyrian army was at the same time that Hezekiah paid the great tribute. We have Merodach-Baladan, who would only be the king of Babylon before 710 BC, which would be fine for the advance, but the advance of Tirhakah would be 10 years before Ethiopia had secured their reign in Egypt. Tirhakah's advance could only take place after 705 BC. And if we consider that the paying of the tribute and the destruction of the Assyrian army both took place in 701, then we have Tirhakah's advance in the right place, but Merodach-Baladan would long have ceased to be king of Babylon. So the only possible conclusion is that there is a lengthy time between verses 16 and 17 in 2 Kings 18 account, which is not at all unusual for Israel's history or in Bible prophecy. There is an invasion in 714, which is the 14th year of Hezekiah, after which he pays tribute to end the siege. And there is another siege 13 years later, which documents Assyria's defeat at the Battle of Jerusalem in 701 BC, in the 27th year of Hezekiah. Remember, he reigns for 29 years, so this second battle would be within his lifetime. And it would also be the third year of Sennacherib's sole reign. Looking at it this way, the Bible and the historical accounts all agree. Why does Sennacherib return to destroy Jerusalem, knowing the king was robbed of all his assets 10 years earlier? The account says he feared an advance from Tirhakah. Why would he have suspected this? Probably because the Ethiopians had just secured power in Egypt and moved their capital out of Ethiopia into Thebes in Egypt. The Jews were always hoping for Egypt to come to their rescue, so fearing an alliance between Egypt and Judah, he tried to punish the king of Judah. He wanted to break Judah before the Egyptian forces could join together with Judah. And the account, as we saw, read that Sennacherib heard that Tirhakah was advancing. So in 1 Kings 18, we have two Assyrian assaults on Jerusalem. The first in the 14th year, when Hezekiah yields to the crown prince, delivering him all the silver and gold in Jerusalem, even cutting off the gold from the doors of the temple. And second, 11 years later, when Hezekiah resists and God delivers him. Now, some chronologists say that you can't break the verses up that way, that it wouldn't make sense. But anyone familiar with Bible prophecy and familiar with the kings as a history must realize that the Bible constantly does this. It even does it right here in the life of Sennacherib. For instance, after Hezekiah's victory, we are told in 2 Kings 19 at verse 36, "So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh. And it came to pass, as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch his god, that Adremelech and Sharezer his son smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia. And Esarhaddon his son reigned in his stead." So this happened and is recorded in the Assyrian records. Sennacherib's son slew him in Nineveh following Sennacherib's defeat at Jerusalem. But how long after his defeat at Jerusalem was he slain? Sennacherib says the battle for Jerusalem was in 701 BC, and the Assyrian records show his death was in 680 BC, 21 years later. So between verses 36 and 37 in all chronologies, whether conventional, new, or biblical, we have 21 years between verses 36 and 37. So there should be no objection to noting 13 years difference between the siege where Hezekiah pays tribute and the second siege in which he does not. If asked why does God then group these two scenes together as if they are one, the answer is simple: to emphasize the fruitlessness of cooperation with the world. Hezekiah, like his father Ahaz, tried to accommodate the world. Hezekiah at first placated Sennacherib. Ahaz similarly placated Tiglath-Pileser. It did neither of them any good as the oppression continued, and in Hezekiah's case, it even got worse. He yielded to the king of Assyria the first time. Did it do him any good? No, Assyria came back at him again. It was only when Hezekiah relied on God for deliverance that he was freed from Assyrian oppression. The other question asked is, why isn't the 714 invasion then listed in the Assyrian records? Well, it is well documented that Sargon is all over Canaan in times of 616 through 611. But what do we know of Assyria's experience with Jerusalem? Fearing a potential rebellion, Sennacherib was determined to destroy Jerusalem and no longer satisfied with merely taking tribute. He sent Rabshakeh to Jerusalem when he finished with Lachish, and it is here in 701 that Assyria lost 185,000 men in one night. Is not this disgrace reason enough to have the records pertaining to Judah redacted from the Assyrian records? They were redacted because Sennacherib wanted to claim the tribute, which came from the first siege, in the second siege, so he could make some face-saving claim that he received the tribute due to his 701 BC efforts, though those efforts were a complete disaster. By the way, this is Sennacherib's highly edited version of what happened. Sennacherib himself wrote, "As for Hezekiah the Judean, who did not submit to my yoke, I laid siege to 46 of his strong walled cities, and to the small towns in their vicinities, which were without number, and conquered them by means of well-stamped earth ramps and battering rams, brought up close to the walls with the attack of foot soldiers, using mines, breaches, and siege engines. I brought out from them 200,150 people, young and old, male and female, horses, mules, donkeys, camels, oxen, and sheep without number, and counted them as spoil. Himself I shut up like a bird in a cage in Jerusalem, his royal city. I threw up siege works against him, and anyone coming out of the city gate I turned back to his misery. His cities, which I had despoiled, I cut off from his land and gave them to Metinti, king of Ashdod, and Patti, king of Akron, and Silabel, king of Gaza, and thus I diminished his land. I added to the former tribute imposed upon him the payment of tribute and gifts from my lordship. As for him, Hezekiah, the terrifying splendor of my lordship overwhelmed him, and he sent after me to Nineveh, my royal city, his messenger with 30 talents of gold, 800 talents of silver, precious stones, and antimony, large cuts of red stone, couches of ivory, thrones of ivory, elephant hides, elephant tusks, ebony, boxwood, garments of multicolored fabrics, linen garments, blue purple wool, red purple wool, vessels of bronze, iron, copper, tin, garments, his daughters, his palace women, male and female musicians. He sent his messengers to deliver the tribute and to do obeisance." we can see that the first siege, where Hezekiah sent servants and pays the great tribute, is blended with this second siege, where obviously there would have been no tribute paid, as Sennacherib claims. So the first siege is redacted from the Assyrian records so that the events of the first siege can be blended into the second, and so the second siege would not look like the disaster it truly was. So now after this rough start, the Assyrian kings enter their golden age, with Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, and a few years later, Ashurbanipal, the greatest of all Assyrian monarchs. Ashurbanipal takes Assyria to its greatest heights, conquering Thebes in 664, a date which is really the best pillar in archaeology and a point where conventional chronology, David Roll's new chronology, and the Bible chronology all come together. In fact, Ashurbanipal is so successful that he takes on so many projects, from expanding the empires to libraries to universities to his successors, who do not have the brilliance and energy of Ashurbanipal, are incapable of keeping up with his work, and the Assyrian Empire begins to crumble. The empire crumbles from its own weight. Ashurbanipal dies in 627 BC, and in less than 20 years, the wings of the great Assyrian lion are plucked, and the Assyrian Empire is gone. Nineveh, the capital city of Assyria, is sacked in 612 BC, sending the royal family into exile. Then in 609 BC, and this is an important date, in 609 BC, Nabopolassar, Nebuchadnezzar's father, destroys the last vestiges of Assyria and assumes the empire for Babylon. The 609 date is the start of one of the prophecies regarding Babylon. In Jeremiah 25, at verse 9, we read, "Behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, saith the Lord, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land and against the inhabitants thereof, and against all these nations round about, and will utterly destroy them, and make them an astonishment, and a hissing, and a perpetual desolation. Moreover, I will take from them the voice of mirth, and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, and the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstone, and the light of the candle. And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment. And these nations," note that term, "and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. And it shall come to pass, when 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity, and the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it a perpetual desolation. And I will bring upon that land all my words which I have pronounced against it, even all that's written in this book, which Jeremiah hath prophesied against all the nations." This prophecy of 70 years isn't just made against Israel. It's made against all the nations. The king of Babylon would rule the nations for 70 years, and this is exactly what happened. Babylon took control of the Assyrian Empire in 609 BC, and Babylon was defeated exactly 70 years later, when the king of Babylon, Nabonidus by name, was defeated by Cyrus the Persian outside the walls of Babylon. The next king of Babylon, Belshazzar, did continue a few more years, but he was walled up in the city, surrounded by Cyrus and the Persians, and he no longer ruled the nations. So after taking the empire in 609 BC, Egypt begins to challenge Babylon. When Ashurbanipal had conquered Egypt in 664, he had defeated Tirhakah and ended the 25th dynasty. Ashurbanipal had set up another dynasty, his own loyal dynasty, the 26th dynasty, and this was a dynasty, as I said, loyal to Assyria. This is why Pharaoh Necho of that 26th dynasty comes north with the intent of delivering the dying Assyrian Empire from the Babylonians. Josiah, king of Israel, comes and fights with Necho and dies at the battlefield at Megiddo. Egypt continues north, trying to preserve and reestablish the Assyrians in the north, and for 3 years fights the Babylonians in Syria and Canaan. The wars climax with the Battle of Carchemish, spoken of in Jeremiah 46. The word of the Lord, which came to Jeremiah the prophet against the Gentiles, against Egypt, against the army of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, which was by the river Euphrates in Carchemish, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, smote in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. So it was actually the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, but as we have seen, it was his 4th year that Judah stopped paying taxes to Egypt and began paying taxes to Babylon. So Carchemish was in 605 BC, as we discussed at the start of this talk. Immediately after Carchemish, Nebuchadnezzar drove south, driving back Egypt and taking control of Syria and Canaan. His father, Nabopolassar, dies about a month later after the battle, and Nebuchadnezzar returns to Babylon to be made king. After that, he goes south again and takes Israel at the beginning of the following year in 604 BC. And 604 BC starts 2 important Bible prophecies. For the first one, Israel under the law was to be punished 7 times for their sins. We read this in Leviticus 26, 27 through 28. And if he will not for all this hearken unto me, but will walk contrary to me, then I will walk contrary unto you also in fury. And I, even I, will chastise you 7 times for your sins. Prophetically, a time is 360. It's where our 360 degrees in a compass or in a circle comes from. The earliest calendars had 12 months of 30 days to make a year with a periodical adjustment. So a time is 360 days. And on the prophetic principle of a day for a year, a time is 360 years. So when we look at this punishment from Leviticus, 7 times is then 7 times 360, or 2,520 years. If we take 604, the 4th year of Jehoiakim, and the year that Israel fell to Babylon the first time, this being the very start of Nebuchadnezzar's image, and we add 2,520 years to that date, we come to the year 1917. And those of you doing the math, make sure that you remember there is no year 0 in archaeology. So you always have to add an extra year. Now, what happened in 1917? Well, in December of that year, the British under General Allenby took Jerusalem, freeing Jerusalem from Nebuchadnezzar's image for the first time in exactly 2,520 years. Now, the second prophecy, which began in 604 BC, is directly related to Israel and the time they were to spend in Babylon. This is the prophecy that Daniel was referring to when he said in Daniel 9:2, in the first year of his reinforcing, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. The prophecy that Daniel was referring to was this, in Jeremiah 29:10. We already looked at it once, but we'll look at it more briefly this time. For thus saith the Lord, that after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you and perform my good word toward you, in causing you to return to this place. So after being carried away to Babylon in 604, 70 years later, which would be 534 BC, Cyrus made his decree, allowing Israel to return. And this is precisely what they did. And we will go over this 534 date in more detail in our next lecture, which deals with the Persian aspect of Nebuchadnezzar's image. But briefly, as we said, Cyrus defeated the Babylonian king Nabonidus in 539 and was not able to get through the walls. It wasn't until 2 years later in 537 that he went through the wall and killed Belshazzar, who was then in his 3rd year, having reigned from 539 to 537. Cyrus made the Bible's Darius, and that's history's Cyaxares, who was his uncle, his mother's full brother. He made him the rightful, and he was the rightful heir to the Median throne. Cyrus made him king in 537, and he rules 2 years. Cyrus departs at that time to conduct another war in the north, but he returns to Babylon in 535, and in 534, exactly 70 years after being carried away in the first Babylonian victory, he declared himself king of Babylon and decreed that Judah, along with all the nations, were allowed to return to their homes, the Jews then returning to Jerusalem. So this covers the 3 chronological prophecies related to Babylon. First, the beginning of the 7 times of punishments from 604 and Jerusalem's falling to Babylon, to Israel's finally being freed from the image in 1917 by Britain and General Allenby. Second, the 70 years that the king of Babylon would rule the nations, which began when Nebuchadnezzar's father, conquered Assyria and took control of the empire in 609. And this lasted exactly 70 years to 539 BC, when Cyrus, the Persian king, defeated the Babylonian king Nabonidus outside the walls of Babylon. And third, the 70 years that Judah would be exiled in Babylon, which began in 604 when Nebuchadnezzar invaded Jerusalem in the 4th of Jehoiakim, and when Daniel was taken to Babylon, till Cyrus freed all the Jews to return to Jerusalem in 534 BC.